Hey guys, welcome back to A Whole Lot of Grey. I'm your host Anish Chandram, and since it's New Year's Eve, today is actually going to be the final episode of 2020. So if you've enjoyed my content in any capacity, it would genuinely mean a whole lot if you could hit the bell icon and subscribe to my channel, maybe drop a like or a comment, and share it with your friends and family. These are all actions that I would be immensely appreciative of for the rest of my life and genuinely would go a long way. And I sincerely hope that you guys will stick with us through 2021 and the year after that, because I promise you we have a bunch of really cool, insightful, data-driven content coming your way. So without further ado, let's jump right into the final episode of 2020.
Black lives matter! 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 Black lives matter!
On May 26, 2020, the internet was absolutely swarming with video footage that had captured the brutal manner in which George Floyd was murdered by three police officers from the Minneapolis Police Department. Now, this incident sparked global outrage as activists took to the streets in practically every corner of the globe, be it the large crowds that took over the streets of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil or the protesters outside the American Center in Kolkata, India. It was clear that this specific instance of police brutality elicited a response from citizens around the world. Now, these protests intended to not only ignite the relevant reformations in areas such as criminal justice and police reform, but also to spark important conversations surrounding the racial inequalities endured by people of color at the hands of criminal justice systems in many countries around the globe. Now, many prominent celebrities use their platforms to, encourage such conversations, and they insisted that any sort of discomfort and awkwardness brought about by having such discourse, or rather engaging in such discourse, is negligible when you compare it to the tangible harms, especially such as mass incarceration or the loss of life, that many people of color have suffered throughout human history at the hands of criminal justice systems around the globe. Now, among others, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were two such celebrities who used their platforms to echo the above sentiments. As the respective president and vice president of the Queen's Commonwealth Trust, which, if you're wondering what that is an organization that connects young changemakers from within the Commonwealth with one another. So in that capacity, as president and vice president of this organization, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were hosting a video conference with the organization's youth leaders, wherein they discussed how to best achieve universal justice and universal equality. Now, as such, one of the topics that was eventually discussed was the global slave trade, regarding which Prince Harry remarked, and I quote verbatim, "When you look across the Commonwealth, there is no way that we can move forward unless we acknowledge the past." And this quote is actually a great segue into the three segments of today's episode that we'll be discussing. The first is the reluctance of Britain to acknowledge the British Empire and Commonwealth's past. The second is the history of Britain's denial regarding such atrocities in the Commonwealth and British Empire. And the third and final path is how can we best move forward from all of this. So without further ado, let's jump right into the first one, which is the reluctance of Britain to acknowledge the British Empire's and Commonwealth's past. So when we talk about the reluctance of Britain to acknowledge the British Empire's and Commonwealth's past, I guess it's imperative to know what is the Commonwealth, right? So for those unaware, the Commonwealth is a political association of 54 countries, almost all of which are former colonies of the British Empire. Now, given that the British Empire's colonial exploits have led to far graver atrocities than the actions of any singular police department in the United States, one would think that Prince Harry's comments regarding the Commonwealth would be met with welcoming acceptance, right? When he says, when we talk about the Commonwealth, we cannot move forward unless we acknowledge the past. You would think this would be met with, crazy fervor that yes, Prince Harry's correct, especially surely since thousands of British citizens decried the unjust and deeply unsettling killing of George Floyd in Minnesota by taking to the streets and protesting in England. Prince Harry's comments must have been well in sync with the theme of acknowledging the perverse racial inequalities and injustices that have plagued people of color around the world for centuries. You would think this to be the case, right? It seems like a fair expectation, right? Actually, you're wrong, because Prince Harry's comments resulted in Robert Jobson, who, again, and I'm quoting, is the alleged godfather of royal reporting. Meaning, like, I guess he's the best reporter when it comes to anything to do with the royal family. And he claimed in an interview that Prince Harry had criticized the Queen's life work, while MP Andrew Rosendale remarked, "The monarch will not be too pleased with her grandson." So straight off the bat, you see the godfather of royal reporting and this British MP just decrying Prince Harry for making that seemingly innocent comment, especially because, like I said, people in Britain have taken to the streets to protest George Floyd's police brutality case. So you would think they truly, truly, truly do care about racial injustices and racial inequalities. But it's a bit ironic that Prince Harry's comments were straight off the bat met with this. But anyway, if you think those are isolated examples, prominent academia at Britain's most prestigious institutions have also lambasted the prince for his comments. The professor of theology at the University of Oxford, Nigel Bigger, has commented that the Commonwealth does not have anything to be ashamed of following Prince Harry's comments. Professor Saul Dubow, who teaches Commonwealth history at the University of Cambridge. So he literally teaches the history of the Commonwealth at England's best institution. And even he said that Prince Harry has displayed a very shallow understanding of history by making those comments regarding the Commonwealth. Now these comments, in addition to, these comments from the British MP, from this godfather of royal reporting, from this Oxford and Cambridge professor, these comments that they've made in response to Prince Harry, first of all, they're factually inaccurate, okay? And second of all, they do serve as a metaphorical middle finger to all the citizens of African and Asian countries that were looted, plundered, and decimated under British rule. And what's baffling is that these comments have been made by, high-ranking journalists in England, top politicians, and academia at Oxford and Cambridge, which are, England's best universities. So these are individuals who inhabit some of the most influential spheres of public discourse in Britain. So straight off the bat, that's just, the context surrounding Britain's insane reluctance to acknowledge that, yes, the British Empire and the Commonwealth did some things maybe that we should acknowledge, rectify, and try and move on, right? Instead, they're just reluctant to accept it, and which is a good segue to the second segment of this episode, which is the history of this reluctance and the history of this denial. So this mentality of, outright denial and defensiveness in response to Britain's colonial era atrocities is honestly nothing new. It didn't start with these Oxford and Cambridge professors. Its origin story far predates Prince Harry's comments about the Commonwealth. So way before Prince Harry's even made this seemingly innocent comment, and the godfather of royal reporting and these professors have got him for it, way before that, the UK has this history of denying colonial atrocities. And George Monbiot, who is, the reputed British political columnist, he chillingly recounts an incident in the 1990s where the UK government intentionally has destroyed thousands of documents that detail the crimes against Britain's colonial subjects during the reign of the British Empire. And these documents, were discreetly stored and shielded from the general public and historians until their eventual destruction at the hands of the government, while the UK, and the second part, which is I think pretty shocking, the UK Foreign Office all the while has denied the very existence of such documents. Now, in 2013, ahead of his visit to India, which I have to note for all my listeners, if you didn't know this, India was not just another country run by the British, it was the crown jewel of the British Empire, okay? So in 2013, the then Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, was quoted as saying, "I think there's an enormous amount to be proud of in what the British Empire did and was responsible for." I think the irony of making that statement prior to visiting India, which was a country that lost, they say 35 million people and $40 trillion at the hands of the British Empire. So the irony of making this statement before you visit India maybe is lost on Mr. David Cameron that day. Now, in addition to all of this, there are countless other examples to substantiate what ought to be an indubitable fact in human history, that the British Empire's systematic discrimination towards people of color in their African and Asian colonies has led to millions of lives lost, trillions of dollars looted, and entire civilizations erased. And if you don't think all this analysis and examples are enough, I would urge you to check out two things on your own time. One is the Bengal famine, and the other is Rhodesia and what the UK did to Zimbabwe. Check both those out. Now, Professor Deanna Heath, who teaches Indian and colonial history at the University of Liverpool, has actually admitted that many undergrad students that she encounters on campus often have zero clue about the subject areas that she teaches in. She's written extensively about the need for Britain's schooling system to acknowledge the British Empire's atrocities, as many British citizens in the present day are, descendants of African and South Asian countries themselves. There's a huge Indian diaspora and Jamaican diaspora, Pakistani diaspora of individuals that currently reside in the UK and have integrated into British society. So at least for them, there should be an active push for Britain's schooling system to teach about these colonial atrocities during the Commonwealth and British Empire era. Now, when high-ranking Labour Party MP Jeremy Corbyn echoed Deanna Heath's thoughts and put forth a proposal to address this schooling issue in the UK Parliament in 2018, opposition MP Tim Loveton rebuked Jeremy Corbyn's proposal on the grounds of Jeremy Corbyn being, again verbatim, ashamed of Britain and was interested exclusively in talking down Britain's legacy. Mr. Loveton would do well to listen to the legendary American author Zora Neale Hurston, who famously quipped, "I will fight for my country, but I will not lie for her." And that segues again well into the last and final segment of this episode, which is, what is the road going forward? So the Harvard Political Review rightly makes the point that it is in fact more patriotic to recognize the flaws in your country rather than ignore them and trying to sweep them under the rug. So it's the same sentiment with which I want to draw an analogy here. It's the same sentiment with which you would address, problems in your own child or your parent or your girlfriend or whoever, right? If let's say the intention is not to talk them down or be ashamed of them, but rather to get them to recognize any issues they may have and ensure that they move on and improve from them so that, your relationship gets stronger. But that doesn't seem to be the case in Britain regarding the British Empire. So until all tiers of British society, right, most notably the government and academia, unite to acknowledge the grave injustices that Britain has, hurled onto its Asian and African colonies in particular, and their subsequent roles in promoting racist and discriminatory rhetoric towards people of color. Never forget, Rudyard Kipling and Winston Churchill used to refer to us Indians as savages and barbarians and all these crazy terms, right? So until the UK acknowledges all of this, their protests on the streets of London and Manchester in response to George Floyd's death in Minneapolis is at best, it's just an empty promise because it's trendy to do, right? But at worst, it serves again as a harrowing reminder to all the nations ravaged by British colonial rule that their suffering meant less. To reiterate a quote that was mentioned earlier on in this piece, when you look across the Commonwealth, there is no way that we can move forward unless we acknowledge the past. If the UK is serious about its condemnation of racial inequality, they would do very well to listen to Prince Harry.